All right, welcome to the conversation on the Young Turks. We've got a great reporter that we're going to talk to about some really important news happening right now, including, unfortunately, sexual assault allegations against Joe Biden. Ryan Griffin is with us. He's the Washington bureau chief of The Intercept, also a Young Turks contributor, and as usual, broke a really, really important story. So, Ryan, before we get to your story about Time's Up, for folks who don't know, can you tell us who Tara Reid is and what her accusations are?
Yeah, so Tara Reid was a former staffer for Senator Joe Biden in the early 90s, worked for him in 92, 93. And she came out about a year ago, around the same time that there was a real flurry of news coverage around Joe Biden's problems with personal space, which was kicked off, if you remember, by Lucy Flores, who said, this is a Nevada politician, she said that while she was waiting to go on stage in 2014, the vice president was behind her, started stroking her hair, rubbing her shoulders, gave her a long, uncomfortable kiss on the back of her head, and really kind of, really threw her and, messed up her abilities to speak and made her feel uncomfortable. And that kicked off kind of a news cycle or two around Joe Biden and his kind of handsiness. There was then pushback to it from particularly on The View, and that's what's relevant to this story, where most of the women on The View said, look, this is Joe Biden. He puts his hands on people. What are you doing complaining? Like, you're tough. Whoopi Goldberg, I think, said, turn around and smack the guy. Which, it is asking a lot of somebody. This is somebody who I believe she was running for lieutenant governor at the time, and she's got the vice president flying to Nevada to campaign for her. So to ask her to turn around and just smack the vice president, basically throwing away her race for lieutenant governor at that point, is asking an awful lot. And so Tara Reid was watching all of this unfold and saw particularly the folks on The View saying, is there really anything to this? If there's so much to this, why haven't other people spoken up? The very similar things had happened to Tara while she was working for Joe Biden. And so she came forward to her local paper and she became part of this national conversation. And she said that he had, uncomfortably on a number of occasions run his fingers through her curly hair in front of people, had kind of rubbed her shoulders, had at one point, and this is what created a dust up in the office, had asked her basically to serve as a cocktail waitress. She was a former model and actress before she became a Hill staffer, asked her to kind of serve as a cocktail waitress at a fundraiser, which she ended up not doing, and it caused some problems in the office. So she came out then, and then immediately she got utterly annihilated online because she lives in Northern California. She'd been watching a bunch of Oliver Stone documentaries about Russia on YouTube. She had a Russian friend in her writing circle, and she was starting to write a novel about that was set in Russia. And so she wrote a couple of pieces on Medium that were extremely flattering toward Russia and toward Vladimir Putin particularly. And immediately people seized on these and said, well, look at this Russian operative who's now making accusations against Joe Biden. And so she completely clammed up, didn't say anything for several months until she kind of came back out of her shell and started reaching out to reporters again in last summer, which culminated in then going to Time's Up earlier this year to say that she had an additional allegation that she had wanted to tell but hadn't been able to because of kind of she felt like she hadn't been able to because of the kind of crush of the blowback, which was related to a sexual assault that took place while she was working with Biden. So that's kind of the background on who she is.
Right. So before we get to the things that I'm actually most fascinated by in this story, which is the press reaction. There's a Democratic establishment reaction. I think that shows their hypocrisy, but I'm not surprised by it. The press is amazing. But before we get there, we still have some ground to cover here. So I think it was Isaac Edward Dovere. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce his name. It was the one who mainly attacked her as the Russian operative, right? I mean, because there isn't an establishment point of view that guy won't back.
Right. No, he's a quite committed ideologue, which is impressive. Like it's most of the centrists that you find in this world are, they're just kind of like whatever. And if the politics move in a different direction, they'll move in a different direction. That guy is deeply committed to his worldview, and so I guess for that you got to respect him. But that's right. So he kind of went on the warpath in posting a lot of these quotes from her Medium posts about Putin, which to be clear, like she's not a Russian operative. Russian operatives don't praise Putin. Because then it exposes them as Russian operatives. Like that's not how you do this kind of thing. If anybody has seen The Americans, they weren't out there telling their neighbors how amazing the USSR was, because then your cover's blown.
Yeah. So look, I read the Medium post, and to say that I'm not a fan of Putin is the world's greatest understatement. And so some of it made me uncomfortable. And I think it's actually fair to ask questions about Tara Reid. I'm not in the camp of believing women means that you don't ask any questions and you assume immediate guilt. I don't think that anybody's really in that camp. It just means hear them out, take their allegations seriously and credibly, which was the rule until Tara Reid. And now that rule apparently no longer exists. We're going to get to that in a second. But I mean, the writer we're talking about writes at Politico and has never met a progressive he didn't want to destroy, and hasn't written an incredibly mean article about. But the reason that I bring him up here, because it isn't about him. Who cares about him? I personally, I don't know him from Adam, and I don't care. It's that if you were going to have a negative story about a progressive that you wanted to plant, he's the guy you would go to. You would get your Oppo research people to go, oh my God, I found something on Medium. Let me give it to Isaac Edward, presumably Dovere, and he'll write it, and he did. So the minute you say Russia and Washington, it not only ends the conversation, and everybody who's watched the Young Turks knows I don't agree with anybody on Russia. I don't agree with the establishment. I don't agree with the people who call it Russiagate, etc. I have a unique opinion on that, But in Washington, it's also a code word for illegitimate. Don't touch. Right? Right. So now, in this case, though, Tara Reid's accusations, and this is also an interesting point about her credibility, and these are things that need to be discussed. Her allegations went from touching my hair, etc., asking me to serve at this party, to far worse. And so we've talked about in the show, and it's super uncomfortable to talk about. All these stories are, but I'll tell the audience, and then you'll tell us what happened with Time's Up. So she went on Katie Halper's show. She explained it. She went on Rising. She most importantly went to Time's Up, the people who are supposed to pursue this and help women in this situation. And she said it was actually worse. One time he pushed me up against the wall, went under my skirt, inside my skirt, and penetrated me with his fingers. So that is devastating. That is a very, very serious charge. And again, Young Turks, we don't follow any of the rules. Previous rules were you're not even allowed to talk about the severity of the charge. Any charge they're all equal. I remember people telling me this and yelling at me for this. And we didn't agree then. We don't agree now. To me, touching people's hair and making them uncomfortable is terrible. And the vice president shouldn't do that. That's an abuse of his power. He should at least have enough sense to know that people feel uncomfortable about that. But the kind of sexual assault that Tara Reid is describing now is a whole different level and clearly massively important. So she goes to Time's Up, and Ryan, this is where your reporting picks it up. What happened?
Right. So Time's Up is this organization that was founded out of the Me Too movement, had the most successful GoFundMe campaign in the site's history, raised $24 million just there, on top of all the money they've raised elsewhere, and they've put that toward defending women who work in male-dominated industries, who are victims of sexual harassment or assault, and they fund both legal cases and PR work on behalf of those women. They've worked on behalf of a bunch of the Weinstein victims. They've done a lot of terrific work over the years, and they're the place that if you are a victim who wants to come forward, that you want to go to. So she reached out in January of this year, said, I have this story, and she was moving along. Her initial conversations with TIMESUP were productive, and they referred her to a number of attorneys and told her, we have this nonprofit fund that can help you with legal bills and with PR. Which she needed. She's a working class person who can't swing the giant retainer for the lawyers that this would cost. And then a few weeks later, as it continued to go on, in another call with a director, she was told, it turns out that we can't help you because the person who you're accusing is running for federal office. And we're a tax-exempt 501c3. We can't be engaged in electioneering, and so therefore we can't fund your legal case. We can't fund any of the PR around you. We're still happy to refer you to our network of attorneys, but if they want to work for money, then we can't help you out. And we wish you the best. We support you, but we can't do that for you. Now, I talked to a couple of tax lawyers who said that's not a reasonable interpretation of tax law. I mean, first of all, you have to worry about risk. Like, it is the Trump administration's IRS going to is the Biden administration, like if Biden actually goes on to win, or is the Trump administration going to come after this 501c3 for coming after Joe Biden with an allegation like this? That's just completely implausible. And so,
right. So yes,
but also the legal question is, just real quickly, the legal question is, if you have a set of criteria, we represent women who have allegations against men in male-dominated industries who've done X, Y, and Z, then as long as your case fits that, it doesn't matter if the person is running for federal office. That's what a lot of tax lawyers told me. So as long as they follow that criteria, they should have been okay.
Yeah. So look, to me, that's super obvious. But I want to press on that a little bit. So have they never criticized the politician? Did they not speak out about Al Franken? I genuinely don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Because they're all running for federal office. Right. They all run for re-election.
So there was if you remember, there was a California case that you might remember the details of, where there was a lobbyist who had a claim against, or had a case against a politician, a state politician in California, where they were active participants in that one. Now, I guess that wouldn't be a federal case, but I don't think you can use tax-exempt money for a state election either. Most of the cases they do are actually in the business community and in entertainment and elsewhere. But this scenario would rule out representing somebody who had a case against Donald Trump, any member of the House of Representatives, any senator, that feels that feels a bit strange for the type of organization that they are.
That's insane. So if a woman comes up and says Mitch McConnell sexually assaulted me, they're going to say whatever, go take it up with someone else.
Right, he's running for office. Yeah.
Yeah. No. First of all, I just flat out don't believe them. Okay, how's that? I don't believe you. I think that if it was a Republican, you definitely would have taken it up. If it was a progressive, you probably would have put bells on and taken it up. Okay, so let's just keep it real. So all of a sudden, this new standard of like, oh, running for office, but we did the state thing, so running for federal office. Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. Okay, so let's talk about the nature of power. So Time's Up, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's donors or if it's just Washington zeitgeist, et cetera, decides, hey, we represent everybody that's a victim of sexual assault, except if you were sexually assaulted by a really powerful Democrat. So good night and good luck. Okay, so then the Democratic establishment, of course, closes ranks. Besides which, they then go on to smear her by saying she's a Bernie Sanders supporter. She was an Elizabeth Warren supporter. Apparently, she also supported Marianne Williamson for some time. Yeah, and she's like, I ran out of options. They all dropped out.
She's a Northern Californian. She's that's where she lives now, and she's true to those politics. And so, that's right. She started out. She even liked Tulsi. She was curious about Tulsi, but liked Marianne Williamson. Then you're right. Then she moved to Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren faded, and she moved to Bernie Sanders. So right, it's not exactly that she's a Bernie bro, and she supported Hillary actually in 2016 over Bernie in the primary. So this is not someone who's been kind of a Bernie bro warrior for 4 years. But for sure, she didn't support Joe Biden in the Democratic primary. Like that, we can certainly grant that and acknowledge that.
All right, so let's talk about the mainstream media here, because to me, that's the most interesting part of the story. So now, by the way, you guys should all know that, and it's in Ryan's story on The Intercept, that if you, they went, she said, I told my mom, my brother, and my friend back then. Her mom has passed away, but both the brother and the friend confirmed that Tara Reid did say back in the 1990s when this happened that Joe Biden had done this to her, to people that know her. That's like the gold standard for, is it true, right? And so now New York Times, I don't know, maybe I missed it. Have they covered the story at all, Ryan?
I don't think either the Times or the Post have yet, no.
And how about CNN?
There may have been an article that so Biden came out publicly with a statement denying it, and releasing a statement from his executive assistant, who was her boss, who also said that she'd never, heard of anything like this. So it's possible CNN did a web article about his denial, but I certainly haven't seen any in-depth coverage. From them.
I haven't seen it on cable news at all. And if anyone did any coverage of it, it was minuscule because it's nowhere to be found. Not part of the national conversation, completely stonewalled. And in fact, Ryan, sorry to hear, apparently you lost your credibility because when you broke the story about Dr. Blasey Ford, and how Kavanaugh might have done something outrageous to her. You were the most credible reporter in the country. You were an American hero. Now you break a story about Joe Biden in similar circumstances, and all of a sudden Howard Dean and other folks tell me you're not credible anymore. Sorry that happened to you. So let's dive into it, Ryan, before we run out of time. I'm not missing anything, right? There is no actual standard. They're just so biased. They're like, if it happened to a progressive and it was done by an establishment Democrat, we're just not going to cover it because we're the most biased people in America.
I mean, you certainly could take quotes and do a quiz. Was this said by a Republican about Christine Blasey Ford, or was this said by a Democrat about Tara Reid? And I think people would have a coin toss chance of getting through that type of a quiz.
Yeah. So have you heard anything from the rest of the press as to any defense of why they're not covering it? Because what I don't want to do, Ryan, is I don't want to get out and tell everybody it's super credible and she's definitely right, and then not know something, and then it turns out they say, oh, New York Times already knew that she had blah, 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 whatever it is, right? And they just didn't share it with you, Cenk, and you thought she was credible and she wasn't, right? Like, did they disprove something she said? Like, I don't want to miss it. But right now, It looks like it's just as credible a case as I have ever seen.
Yeah, I think people are working on it from what I've been able to gather. And there's a pandemic going on, which is taking up a lot of people's attention, but there were no witnesses. So everybody knows that, it can be established that she worked there. There are, people she told at the time who are credible. One of the people, and I've heard this from some reporters, one of the people who, not her brother, but her friend, has no interest in being public, and is a Republican now. Worked for Ted Kennedy in the 1990s, is now a Republican. That person does not want to be named. So some news outlets certainly are hesitant to go with someone who won't put their name publicly on it. That could have something to do with it, to answer your question in the most good faith way possible. But there hasn't been anything, otherwise that has, kind of jumped out and said, oh, whoa, pump the brakes here. This is crazy. Maybe some of the news outlets are having a hard time getting their heads around the Putin writing. That maybe that's part of it. I understand that America is a wild place filled with people with all sorts of wild opinions. You and I, we talk to regular people all the time, and regular people have very irregular opinions. They don't, they don't just parrot exactly what they're hearing on cable television. In fact, there's a good chunk of people, maybe it's 5% of the country, who, if they're told something by cable television, then they automatically believe the opposite until it's proven otherwise. And that's actually the case for her with this Russia thing. She was 2012, she told Russia's a big friend of the United States. Now she's told that Russia is the most evil place on the planet. And so because she's being told that by the mainstream media, she's like, well, that must be a lie. I don't believe that. Because they've lied about so much else. And there are a lot of people like that. And there are reasons that people have that attitude towards the establishment and toward mainstream media information that's pumped their way.
So Ryan, super quick, your honest assessment, if this exact story was about Bernie Sanders, about how he pushed a woman up against the wall and assaulted her this way, is there any chance in the world that the New York Times and every cable news outlet wouldn't have covered it immediately?
No, I think they would have gone for that. I do. I wondered about that. Now it would be so out of character for Sanders that maybe, depending on the specific allegation, there would be some discounting of it. But I think that the impulse would be in that direction, like you said.
They'd believe it immediately, and they wouldn't let anyone question it. And they would immediately call anyone who questioned it illegitimate and supporting a supporter of sexual assault.
Right, and they'd probably enjoy that that charge of hypocrisy. Because a lot of centrists, they resent the left for making them feel like they're impure. You're purer than thou, and so here you are defending sexual assault. So I think they would probably get a real kick out of that.
Yeah. Last thing on this story, if the fact that they actually removed her from Biden's office, even if you say, hey, look, that the last part of the story of the up against the wall and all that stuff, et cetera. In judging whether that's true, remember that when she said, hey, Biden told me he liked my legs and that's why he wanted me to serve drinks, they basically fired her for that. So there's already proven history of her complaining about sexual innuendo and harassment at that office and her being removed from it. Do I have that right?
Right, and even the interview was a bit creepy, where she's interviewing with her boss, and Biden comes in and looks at her and says, "Hire her," which the way she tells the story is just, it's quite believable. And you can imagine it going down in a Senate office in 1993 that way. And it kind of fits with what we understand about Joe Biden. So right, there was, as she had described it, a pattern of that throughout her tenure there.
Yeah. And by the way, you might not want to bring corroborating witnesses for Anita Hill if you're worried about your history. Okay. So so there's plenty of evidence here to at least have it be an open question. But if you're the mainstream media, that's not how you operate. You just support whoever is the establishment Democrat, sometimes establishment Republicans, and you treat progressives, including victims of sexual assault, as invisible. So congratulations to you, mainstream media, Democratic establishment, and Time's Up. You must be so proud. Okay, we're out of time, unfortunately, so we got to leave it right there. Ryan, thank you for joining us. Thank you for writing yet another important story. Everybody check it out at The Intercept. Thanks, brother.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.